Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive right into the fascinating reality behind one of North America's most enduring and, honestly, incredibly misunderstood legends, the Thunderbird. Now, if you live in North America, you have absolutely heard this name. You've seen it slapped on corporate logos, you've watched it in movies, and you've probably seen it on the hoods of some pretty sweet classic cars. But beneath all that modern commercialization lies a profoundly sacred 4,000-year-old cosmological truth. So today, we're going to strip away the pop culture, ignore the internet rumors, and look at what the actual archaeological and ethnographic evidence tells us. And trust me on this one, the reality is way more captivating than the myths.
Okay, let's just go ahead and address the giant flying elephant in the room right off the bat. Was the Thunderbird actually a surviving prehistoric beast? If you spend any time on certain cryptozoology corners of the internet, you've probably seen the claims. People genuinely argue that indigenous peoples were actually describing encounters with late surviving dinosaurs. They'll ask, hey, was the Thunderbird a leftover pterosaur or maybe an extinct Pleistocene giant condor, known to scientists as Pterotornis muriami, which had an absolutely terrifying 12-foot wingspan? And, it's an incredibly tempting idea, right? Just the thought that our ancestors might have walked the earth while dodging massive prehistoric sky monsters. But to really understand this legend, we have to ground ourselves in the hard data.
Because, look, the internet absolutely loves the idea of surviving flying reptiles, but the scientific reality is so much more fascinating than a biological monster. The scientific consensus is crystal clear. There is absolutely zero physical evidence, no bones, no nests, no preserved eggs, to suggest that pterosaurs or giant teratons survived into the human era in North America. I mean, pterosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. So if there was no giant biological cryptid flying around, where in the world did these incredibly vivid, highly specific stories come from? Well, the answer lies in something much more complex. It's about human psychology and how ancient cultures brilliantly interpreted the chaotic natural world around them. So you might be wondering, if there was no physical monster, how do human brains completely fabricate these massive collective memories? Let me give you literally the most famous example in all of Thunderbird lore. For decades, cryptozoologists have sworn up and down that they vividly remember seeing an 1890 newspaper photograph from Tombstone, Arizona. They'll tell you it shows a group of cowboys standing next to a massive, nailed-up flying reptile. People have written entire books about it. They can describe the photo in perfect, agonizing detail. But here is the wild part. That photograph never existed. It's a textbook case of what psychologists call false memory syndrome or confabulation. Basically, the memory likely stems from really vivid written descriptions, and our own collective imagination just steps in and fills in the blanks. The human mind is incredibly powerful, and sometimes it just sees exactly what it expects to see. And speaking of things not being exactly what they seem, even the name we use is a bit of an illusion. The very word Thunderbird is actually a flawed English catch-all term that was coined by outsiders back in 1848. It lumps together an incredibly diverse family of distinct indigenous concepts from completely different language families. For instance, over on the Algonquian languages, you have Animiki, which translates to thunderer, or Binasi, meaning great bird. Over in the Siouan language family, you have Wakinyan, the winged one. And out west with the claim of people, you've got Lemlins. It is so vital to understand that this isn't some single monolithic god. In fact, in many of these traditions, they use the plural forms of these words. That means we're talking about an entire class of powerful beings, not just one lone creature soaring through the sky. So how far back does this deep, complex belief system actually go? To grasp the true antiquity of this spiritual concept, we have to trace the physical archaeological evidence, and it takes us back at least 4,000 years across North America. This is definitely not some recent campfire story. Way back in the Archaic period, around 4000 BCE, we find these stylized X-shaped raptor motifs in the Old Copper Complex. Fast forward to the Hopewell interaction sphere around 100 BCE, and we see beautiful Thunderbird shapes cut directly out of Great Lakes copper, which proves this sacred iconography was being traded over incredibly long distances. And by the Mississippian period, between 900 and 1600 CE, this raptor imagery becomes deeply integrated into chiefly authority and warrior status. For thousands of years, this symbol was literally an absolute cornerstone of North American life. Okay, so if it wasn't a physical bird, what exactly was it to these ancient peoples? When you look across dozens of different tribal nations, the descriptions share some really striking similarities. We're talking about a gigantic, supernatural avian spirit, and in some stories, they were large enough to carry away literal whales. But the absolutely defining feature is its direct physical connection to the storm. Its massive wing beats physically produce the thunder. Flashing its eyes or opening its beak shoots out destructive lightning. It's said to live way up high in the sky or on floating mountains far removed from us humans. Out there, it acts as a cosmic guardian, and in some traditions, it's a strict moral enforcer that punishes those who break sacred community rules.
Now, all of this sets up an epic, perpetual battle that is born out of what we call vertical cosmology. Ancient North American cosmologies often divided the entire universe into 3 distinct tiers. You have the upper world, you have the middle world, which is where we humans live, and you have the beneath world. The Thunderbird completely rules the upper world, but it has an eternal arch-enemy down in the beneath world, these terrifying chthonic forces like the underwater panther or the great horned serpent. The clash between the Thunderbird and these underworld serpents isn't just some cool action story, it is the central cosmological drama. It's the grand narrative that explains why turbulent forces of nature constantly clash right here in the middle world where we live.
So, what does this all mean for the people experiencing it? Well, it means the Thunderbird isn't just a monster. It perfectly mirrors the duality of nature itself. On the one hand, it is deeply, profoundly revered because it brings the essential, life-giving rain that crops and communities need to survive. If there's a drought, it means that Thunderbirds are either absent or they're angry. But on the exact same token, it wields incredibly dangerous, destructive lightning and winds. It's a classic, perfect representation of the dual nature of the sacred. It can give life and it can take it away in an absolute flash. This perfectly captures how deeply ancient people understood and respected the terrifying power of severe weather.
And what is so brilliant about this core concept of a storm bird is how incredibly adaptable it was, shifting seamlessly to fit entirely different landscapes. Take the Plains tribes, for example. For them, Thunderbirds are often tied directly to the 4 cardinal directions and 4 distinct colors. And they play a massive role in highly personal vision quests. Move over to the Great Lakes region, and they are viewed almost like seasonal migrants, arriving in the spring right alongside the thunderstorms to battle those water spirits. Meanwhile, all the way out in the Pacific Northwest, the Thunderbird is deeply woven into the social hierarchy itself, featured prominently as major clan crests carved into towering cedar totem poles. It's one unified, powerful concept, beautifully adapted to totally different environments.
Now, I should mention that this human impulse to look up at a raging storm and imagine a giant bird is actually a global phenomenon. Look at the Hindu Garuda, which is a giant solar bird that battles serpents, or the Mesopotamian Anzu, an ancient storm bird. The global parallels are absolutely fascinating. But what makes the North American Thunderbird so incredibly unique is its direct physical mechanics. It's the specific belief that the physical flapping of the wings is the thunder, and the blinking of the eyes literally is the lightning. It's not just a symbol, it's a highly specific, localized scientific observation wrapped beautifully in myth. And the why behind this myth lies in a brilliantly logical concept called a natural etiology. That's basically just a cultural framework used to explain a natural atmospheric event. Think about it. If you were living thousands of years ago and you see eagles or hawks or falcons riding these massive swirling thermal updrafts right before a violent thunderstorm hits, it is an entirely logical deduction to connect that soaring bird with the approaching thunder and lightning. The myth wasn't born out of ignorance. It was actually born from intense, highly accurate ecological observation. But fast forward to today, and we see how this profoundly sacred, 4,000-year-old cosmological symbol has been adopted by the modern world in ways that are almost entirely divorced from its original spiritual context. Think about the classic Ford Thunderbird, a car meant to emphasize speed and luxury, or the incredible precision of the U.S. Air Force Thunderbird's aerobatic squadron. It's even in pop culture as the electric bird Pokemon Zapdos. It's used as a mascot for high schools and colleges everywhere you look. But in almost all of these modern commercial uses, that deep cosmological significance, the epic battle between the upper and beneath worlds, the bringing of life-giving rain, all of that is completely stripped away. We've traced a massive journey today, from ancient copper cutouts 4 millennia ago right up to the hoods of 1950s sports cars. We happily borrowed the name because, let's face it, it sounds incredibly cool and powerful. But in doing so, have we completely lost that ancient, humbling reverence for the storm itself? The Thunderbird was never a surviving dinosaur, but it was incredibly, undeniably real to the people who respected the terrifying and life-giving power of nature. So next time a massive thunderstorm rolls into your town, maybe look up at the clouds and try to remember the 4,000 years of human history echoing right there in the thunder. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Catch you next time.